as I sometimes do. So I'm back and glad to be hanging out. So let's get right to it. Here we go. Good morning, Chicago. Good morning, Twin Cities. Yep, it's me. I'm back. Don't push that snooze. Time to get up. Time to wake up. Put your feet on the floor. Feel the coolness of the floor. Come back at you. Take a deep breath. Fill your lungs with, yes, here comes L-I-F-E, life. You are alive. You're well. Let's get to it. You got an assignment, and it is simply to change the world. So go ahead and get that morning beverage going. Get that morning Joe, that orange juice. Don't forget, got to drink that water. Still got to stay hydrated. Keep those systems functioning. And let's get right to it. Let me tell you something, Santita. I almost got so excited I had to remember the other day. You know, you start seeing pro football on television. And I know you're going to make a guy joke, so let me just go ahead and surrender. Because, you know, when football comes anywhere close to a television, some of us kind of lose our minds, and I'm amongst them. But then I had to remember that not yet. Just hold on before you got to wait till we get to the hook for the amen. It's coming. It's coming. I had to remember, though, that this was preseason. I was getting excited about preseason football. And I started thinking about this mindset about anticipation and preparation and how it applies to life. Here's what I want to say to everybody on this Monday morning at the beginning of the week is sometimes you have to allow yourself to get as excited about the process as you do about the outcome. Sometimes we hold back on our excitement of preparation and anticipation, that we deny ourselves the opportunity to appreciate the progress that we're making. And here's what I want you to understand. In preseason football, they put on the uniforms, they get on the field, the referees are in place, there are people in the stand, but all they are focusing on, and here's what I want us all to remember, is they're focusing on getting better. Sometimes the key to the day is not necessarily completion, but improvement. Sometimes it's the preparation. It's the small, incremental noticing of growth that helps us to appreciate that, you know what, the game's coming, but I'm getting better. And so life every day is what I often call a dress rehearsal. It allows us to kind of go through the process of representing and acting out the things that we have in our hearts and our minds, the dreams that we are pursuing. And so what I want us to know is that every preseason game, while the record is not official, the record is still an opportunity to appreciate small victories. Don't worry about if you don't achieve the big thing today. Appreciate the small victories. Recognize that you are dressed to win. You are ready to engage. The season is getting started. And guess what? There's somebody that's so excited about the fact that you are making incremental improvement that they can hardly contain themselves. Guess what? That's me. And so I want you to know on today, don't worry about the fact that you've not yet reached your peak. You're getting better and keep getting better because time's coming. But let me tell you something. I can tell you this at the very beginning. You're already a winner. So go ahead, keep winning, but get ready because the season's coming. And I can't wait to see you rack up the wins that are going to move you to the place of being the champion that you are. That's it. That's all. It's Monday morning. Time to get to it. Thanks, Santita, for letting me hang out with you. Now I got to go get over the excitement from preseason football.
Amen. Amen. Hey, look, my father used to make me watch football. He said, half the world is male, and I want you to be able to have intelligent conversations with men about football and about soccer and about all of these, mind you, this is more than 40 years ago, when these were not the so-called traditional sports for us to be watching. But he wanted me to be involved. He said, I don't want you to be excluded from any conversation. So while I tease you, I hear you. Preseason, everybody. That's right. It just, he's so enthusiastic about it. Pastor Todd Geary, senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church, that iconic church in Baltimore, Maryland, and senior vice president of Rainbow Push. Of course, we've got Dr. Shanina Knighton as we're getting ready to go back to school. Dr. Knighton, getting ready to go back to school. We find that we have 300,000 5,000 teachers and support staff who we have a shortage all around the country. They're saying from the National Education Association that it's a 5 alarm fire. Wow. But in the meantime, what do you do when you go back into the classroom? Dr. Shanina Knighton, new executive director of APEC's new Center for IPC Research, Practice, and Innovation. It's a joy to be with you. Hope you had a marvelous weekend with your family.
Good morning. So no, it was a working weekend, but I was appreciative because I was able to be at home. So it's been a long time coming, believe it or not. But no, I was gonna say it's interesting because like right now, as we're even thinking about going back to school, you bring up a very important topic that many of us are not thinking about when it comes to safety and numbers. So in healthcare, traditionally, we know that numbers matter, which means that as you have an increase of staff, there is a decreased risk of medical errors. Well, in schools, as children prepare to go back, the less staff that they have, which means that there's an overcrowding of classrooms, that means that there is less of a chance that teachers will be able to effectively monitor infection prevention and control practices amongst children, which is why there has to be a multimodal approach when it comes to there has to be more of a multimodal approach when it comes to what children should be doing. And so I can't emphasize that enough, how important it is for us to think through if my child has to go to school, are they going to be resourced enough in order for them to be able to do what it is that they need to do to make sure that they're not bringing infections home? And so I think that
No, I mean, I think
that's
about that because
important.
when parents send their children, I guess, to daycare and then to kindergarten, the babies come back with all kinds of little infections, right? Little viruses and colds and things like that, which spread through your house. But we're not thinking about that. Are infection preventionists part of this back to school drive?
So a lot of so that's the thing. It's not as we should be. Let's just say that. And when I say that it's not as we should be, we should be thinking about it from the standpoint of where our infection prevention is. And so when we say where our infection prevention is, you can say to yourself, okay, what is it that they can provide to our institutions? And right now, that's not a question that's being brought up because everyone has been used to kind of a fend for their self model and doing what it is that they believe is best. And so that is the problem, right now is that we are thinking about it from a different angle. And that angle, unfortunately, is not serving people well because they're saying to themselves, I think I have it and I think that I can figure it out, but that's not quite the case. And unfortunately, when you think about why, let's say there's outbreaks at school and why certain things are happening, it's not a matter of just wearing masks. It's not a matter of just cleaning your hands. It's not a matter of, distancing. It's not a matter of, oh, well, we sprayed the air. But it's a systematic process to all of those things that I don't think that the public has a general understanding of. And unfortunately, because that is the case, we tend to not think through what is best for the actual setting that we're in. So, Santita, your infection prevention and control practices, let's say where you live, is going to be different from mine. If I live in an apartment, let's say, opposed to someone living in a home, then that's going to look different. If there's a classroom that has 50 students opposed to one that has 10 students, those practices are going to look different, right? Because you have a lot more of procedural things that you'll need to do. But some of the basic things that I tell individuals to do is make sure that the students are cleaning their hands coming inside of the classroom. Make sure
wait,
that
hold on. When you do that, do they have to go to the restroom, or have classrooms been retrofitted with sinks and soap?
Yeah, right. But even if they're not retrofitted with sink and soap, there's been so much innovations going on in regards to how to clean your hands, whether we're talking about hand wipes, whether we're talking about hand sanitizers.
Okay.
A simple squirt in every child's hands as they're coming into the classroom. Is it sufficient enough practice to make sure that at least the germs that they had in transition to that class are not transmitting? If you had the one child that wiped their snotty nose right before coming in, which we know is common, then you don't have to worry about that as well. The children that play around with their mask and like to chew on them. So there's a lot of different reasons of why just even a simple squirt of hand sanitizer with kids coming into the classroom can even go a long way. We have to remember that they're risk-lowering measures, so even the small things would actually matter. So that would be important. When we're talking about the actual desk just in itself, meaning, our children rotating desk in classroom during this current climate, we have to ask ourselves, is that wise? Meaning, if you are in let's say one class, right, and that class is 45 minutes and you're having to move around and sit where someone else was sitting, we have to think about the fact that kids might have spit over that desk, not on purpose, but there's droplets on that desk. So maybe rotating desks might not necessarily be the smartest thing. Or we have to also remember that if, let's say, that children are rotating classrooms and switching desks in between classrooms, what is the procedure? Meaning, are you having each individual child wipe down their workspace at the end of class so it's fresh for the new group that comes in? So these are all things that we need to consider, but I'm not sure that every organization or institution has an infection preventionist in their space to make sure that they're ushering on these messages. Now, for the organization that I work for, we do have a subsidiary, which is the Association for Professionals in Infection Prevention and Control consulting arm. And so that consulting arm is hireable. So there are hireable infection preventionists that would actually be able to come out and give organizations recommendations on what it is they should be doing in order to stay safe, including the fact that it doesn't necessarily just have to be in a school. It can be in a work environment. It can be around surveillance. I talk about surveillance all the time, Santita, but it's just the notion that if Jane comes to work on Monday and she's sick, Paul comes in on Wednesday, and he calls out sick, right? And then you start to notice patterns. Being able to have someone to set up an infrastructure to watch those patterns is essential. And so I just want us to kind of keep that in mind, is that we do have the resources out there to help people. It's a matter of us putting those resources together, meaning the people with the expertise, people with the funding, and people that actually know the population that they're served. It can make a perfect soup for us to be able to practice prevention and keep people safe, especially as we're amongst monkeypox. We're getting ready to be amongst COVID and amongst flu and amongst RSV and some other illnesses. And so the thing is we have to think about how do we keep each other safe so that way we don't have a harmful and deadly fall.
That's right. Cleanliness is next to godliness. And not just cleaning, but sanitizing. We need to learn how to do that. It's a new world, but you know what? We can handle it. We just need to know what to do. Of course, the brilliant Dr. Shanina Knighton, registered nurse, infection preventionist, nurse scientist, researcher. She does so much. She's the executive director of Apex News Center for IPC Research, Practice and Innovation. Got to get her and her colleagues into our school systems and our churches and our public spaces and even our private spaces so we can know how to prevent infection. Let's talk about this army who have been deployed by the GOP to polling places in every state of the union and in the territories to keep you from voting. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Dr. Knighton.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
It's great hearing your voice. How's your family?
They're pretty good. Keeping us busy, of course, but no complaints.
Well, I'm going to call you a little bit later because I came across some things. I have some questions for you, of course.
Okay. Well, I'll be right. I'll be around. Definitely got some work to do.
Yes, that's it. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's always wonderful hearing your voice.
Well, thank you so much, and likewise. And I always appreciate you.
Oh, girl, I appreciate you. I've got to reach out to Dr. Deb. I just have had so much going on. Oof. Hmm.
Oh
Wow.
no, trust me. I was gonna say I know what that's like. I
Mm-hmm.
do. It is. It can be a busy time, but just as you mentioned, just really trying to figure out how to keep it all straight. I think is what's most important.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
and we will. Like we'll get it together. I'm confident
Absolutely.
that we will.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
crazy because this summer flew. Do you hear me? This summer decided that it was gonna be like, hey, I'm in here. Bye. It
It's a
did. I'm
lot.
looking up and I'm like, these kids about to go back to school. I'm shopping for school clothes already. And
All right, sending David Daly, Attorney Hoffler, and Chaparral through.
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I just gotta. I don't want to over prepare, but there's a possibility they might be spending some time at home, and I might be running again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true though. That's absolutely
So,
true. That's because that's where we
right, and
are.
so that's it. Exactly, and a lot of people over purchase school clothes and did all of that in preparation. Their kids will be in school the whole year, but they should probably be tailoring back those resources to think about just in case if they need them at home. And so that's kind of like where I'm at right now. Is like I told my kids, I actually made them go through all of their stuff. Like, listen, yeah, I just had to tell them, I'm like, we're going to hold off on this for now.
Oh, absolutely. You've got to. You've got to. Let me do this. Well, honey, I'm gonna see who I have up. Did we get David Daly? I want to make sure I've got my people up.
Yes, we have David Daly, Attorney Hoffler, and Chaparral right now.
Okay, fantastic. And David Daly.
Right here, yes.
Okay, we've been talking with Dr. Shanina Knighton. We need to get her into the school system. Infection preventionist. She's one of the foremost in the world. Our kids need to.
All right, 60 seconds, everybody.
What is going on here? So, okay. All right, stand by. CK, Attorney CK Hoffler.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Whew, okay. All right. Excuse me, beautiful people. Okay. So I got this. All right, everybody call me at 773-763-9278. 773-763-WCPT. Want to hear your voices today? We'll find out more stuff by accident than you do on purpose. You constantly have to ride
10
this
seconds, everybody.
news, everybody. See what's going on. Okay. Hey, Chaparral.
Change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am breathing.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. Let's talk about this army that has been deployed by the GOP across all of the states and the territories to keep you from voting, really, essentially. We're going to talk about that with David Daly, New York Times bestselling author of Rat Effed, and of course his latest book is Unrigged. You must get those books. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And the plan has been to keep the majority of Americans from voting. And it can only work if you don't vote. We're going to be talking about that in just a couple of minutes with David Daly and with the brilliant attorney CK Hoffler, who will be back on Court TV today. So glad that she got a little bit of rest and now she is back up and running at full strength. But first, we've got celebrations by us. I must tell you, Chaparral, I already want some more greens and I want some more oxtails. Thank you.
Yes, Santita, and I got you. I'm actually have an order for Wednesday for some oxtails, so you may get you some this week again.
Thank
Listen,
you.
Celebrations by Us is back open from our vacation, even though it really wasn't a vacation because we were still working. You know how it is, but we are open and available to take care of all your catering and decor needs. So don't hesitate to give us a call at 708-526-4546. 708-526-4546. We can handle all of your sweet tables as well as also balloon arches, custom treat design, whatever it is that you need to handle your party and to make it special. We are the company for you. So don't hesitate to call us at 708-526-4546. We look forward to serving you. Thank you so much, Santita.
You promised to get me my greens with my turkey in it with lots of fat and my oxtails. You promise?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I promise.
Otherwise, I'm gonna have to tell it on the radio that you did not fulfill your promise. Plus, now my mother wants some. How about that? She said, "Oh, she makes good oxtails. Well, let me see if they're gonna be as good as mine and my father too." He said, "So what should?" But he wants his banana pudding from you. Thank you very much. He told me that last night. So, and he's not even in Chicago right now. So there you have it. Of course, everybody, Celebrations by Us, some of the best food going, everybody. 708-526-4546. Everybody, let's talk about this army that is being deployed all across the country in every state, in the territories. They have the potential to overturn votes, really to make minority rule, a reality. It's happening in so many ways, not just being codified into law, but they have volunteers who are going to polling places to keep you from voting. Attorney C.K. Hoffler, that was one of the main thrusts of her presidency as head of the National Bar Association, the largest and oldest Black bar association in the world, more than 66,000 lawyers. We're going to start, CK, with David Daley, senior fellow at Fair Vote and New York Times bestselling author. CK, as you well know, he's been writing about this, sounding the alarm. How long have I known you, David? Has it been like 5-6 years now? And you have
Probably
been,
has been.
yeah,
the first
yeah.
book came out in 2016. So.
Yeah. I heard you on. That's right. I heard you on NPR. I was in Washington. I was helping to care for my grandmother who was transitioning at the time, and you were so easy to reach and so eager to reach out and reach back. And I just thank God for you, because you ended up coming to the convention, the Rainbow Push convention, and we got to get you back here because we need to have like CK like a big voting, I don't know, CK seminar in advance of the elections. Because now with this army that's being deployed, CK, just very quickly before I go to David Daley, what do you make of that, CK?
Well, I think it's atrocious. I think it's voter suppression at its height, and it just goes to show that we are going to have to counter that. There's election protection, which is when lawyers are in the field, deployed in the field at polling stations to ensure the integrity of the process. And both sides, Democrats, Republicans, can have their lawyers there. And so we're going to have to triple our efforts. We had deployed thousands of lawyers during the last presidential election, and they were ready and poised for litigation if necessary. And you really have to do that. So with this battalion of volunteers who are going to be deployed to, I believe, engage in voter suppression, it's going to be critically important for there to be a counter to that, to make sure that people feel safe voting, to make sure that people understand the process of voting, and to make sure right there at the polls, there's someone or there are people who can give people just general advice on voting process or observe abnormalities and tee them up so that they can be addressed on the spot.
Well, there are election inspector and poll challenger workshops sponsored by the Republican National Committee. They state, our mission, David, is to recruit, train, and place Republican election inspectors in every targeted polling location and absentee count board station in order to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. The plan, as outlined according to this Politico report by the Republican National Committee, a staffer in Michigan, includes utilizing rules designed to provide political balance among poll workers, to install party-trained volunteers prepared to challenge voters at Democratic majority polling places. And I look, while I appreciate Liz Cheney and what she's been doing on the January 6th committee, this is how her father and George W. Bush got into office. You had the January 6th riots, but then you had the Brooks Brothers riots in 2020 and at the beginning of 2021. It's no different. No different. And I think that we cannot forget, David, what happened in 2020. In 2000. In 2000 and 2001, that's what they did. That's how Bush and Cheney got into power.
You're absolutely right.
Why are we forgetting about that?
They had a riot in Florida, and they had their allies on the U.S. Supreme Court install them in office. So
they had riots in Florida. Riots.
They most certainly did.
Remember when they were pounding on the door, on the window?
And intimidation. Yeah. The actual.
It was crazy. Remember when they were pounding on the windows, people were trying to count the votes?
Oh, I sure do. And we forget that 3 future members of the U.S. Supreme Court were lawyers on the Republican side in the middle of that. So they were paid back down the line. John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, and I believe Brett Kavanaugh was the third.
Well, you know what? Hold on. Let me bring on Tim from DeKalb, because he's setting you up perfectly for you to respond to him. Tim, how you doing, sweetie? What's on your mind today?
Good morning. I'd like to know who doesn't have the right to vote. Every single person that I know, every single person that I work with has proper identification, is an American citizen. They either send in their votes or they go and vote in person. I've never seen, and I've been a poll watcher probably for 20 years, and I've never seen anybody stop anybody from voting. I think allowing people to have, or forcing people to be American citizens to vote, is constitutional. I think that American citizens should vote. I mean, what you just literally read, word for word, is open voting. Now, I got 4 votes in the mail. My daughter, my son, they're both 18, my wife and myself. I could have filled out those 4 votes, and I could have voted for all of them and mailed them off. That's a travesty. So mail-in voting is what I call zombie voting. People vote weeks upon weeks, if not a month before the election, so you don't know what's going on. And you elect people completely bizarrely without even knowing the full facts of who you're voting for.
But Tim, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than to commit voter fraud. Not to mention the fact the big cases that we've seen, they've been committed by members of the GOP in North Carolina. No. They're the ones who've been doing it. I mean, so for me, this is not a partisan issue. This is a transpartisan issue. On paper, we all have the right, Tim. On paper, we all have the right to vote. But in practice, that is thwarted. So stay right there, Tim, because I want you to hear David Daley out, because he's done the research on it, because anecdotal evidence, we all have that. But you need to look at the big picture. Let's look at the data. David, why don't you respond to Tim?
Sure. Hi, Tim, and thanks for your work as a poll worker. That's really important volunteer work, and much appreciated. It makes the wheels of democracy turn. But I think, as you say, you haven't seen any actual voter fraud. And I think, as you also went on to say, you got these 4 ballots in the mail, 1 for every person in your family. But of course, you didn't mail them in. And that's because there are existing laws that guard against that kind of voter fraud. And there are protections and securities built into the process so people don't do that. And in fact, those laws work, and those security practices are so good that when somebody does turn in a ballot, say for a daughter or for a spouse that died in the weeks for a campaign, right? Even if the ballot arrives and somebody dies in between those 2 weeks and someone mails that ballot in, it is caught. And the number of states that have been doing mail-in voting almost entirely, they will find something between 75 and 100 ballots that they go off and investigate. And you can look up the studies that Oregon and Washington and other states have done, Utah, and they might find, a handful of ballots that they think they have to go out and investigate, and they do. And ordinarily, maybe they'll bring charges in a couple of cases, but even bringing charges in those cases is really rare. It tends to be something like, oh, my spouse died and I mailed in that ballot and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. There is no organized voter fraud. It's been looked for, and not only would it be an extremely inefficient way of trying to turn an election around, it simply doesn't exist. And so the laws that we are seeing here that are coming in almost entirely in states that are extraordinarily competitive and where a few votes, 10,000 votes in Arizona switches the balance, 11,000 votes in Georgia, 20,000 in Wisconsin. So we're seeing a lot of efforts in those states by legislatures, which have, for the last decade or so, have been under the control of one party, in order to make it harder for people to vote. And usually those efforts focus and make it harder for specific people. And those people tend to be younger, they tend to be of color, and they tend to usually favor Democratic candidates. And there's lots of things that you can do in order to just throw up a couple of barriers. There's voter ID, which, as you say, would be probably perfectly fine if everybody did have an ID, but not everybody is like the people who you work with. And not everybody does, in fact, have that ID. Or sometimes the state that is passing this law will actually do research and try to find the exact forms of ID that the people who they don't want to vote, they know that they don't have. And those will be the forms of ID that they will specifically go out and require. So if this was simply a case of everybody, showing an ID and everybody had that ID and the ID was free, tremendous. What you see instead, like in a state like Alabama, when they installed voter ID, was that they then went ahead and closed just about all of the driver's license offices in the Black Belt counties of the state for all but a couple of hours of the month, or up in North Dakota, where they demanded voter ID that had a street address on it, knowing full well that on the Native American land in North Dakota, they don't have actual street addresses. So they demanded that the one thing that they knew those people lacked. And then even if you could get it together to figure out a street address and go up and the driver's license office up there, it's only open about 3 hours a month. And so you would have to take off work and travel those 3 hours and get, a daycare, maybe for a kid. And all of this becomes a barrier to the ballot box. You close down precincts in certain places and just make lines a little bit longer. You purge voting rolls, and we've seen it happen. That 32 million Americans purged from voting rolls between 2014 and 2018. The number of precincts across the South closing most specifically in rural areas and areas with the highest concentration of black voters. It's just making the lines a little bit longer, making the drive a little bit longer, installing precincts someplace where public transportation can't get to. And so all of these things add up, and they especially add up in close states.
You know, CK, when you, and they do add up in close states, they continue to add up. You know, Reverend talks about just, you know, really just shaving a vote here, a vote there. Indeed, this is, just so that you know, Tim, I didn't come up with this. This was a strategy developed by Steve Bannon. It's the so-called precinct strategy. This is their terminology. And they have established a network of partisan poll watchers. I mean, you always talk about not wanting things to be just coming down to Republicans and Democrats. This is what they've done. I didn't do this. This is not something that Democrats developed. And you ought to know by now that I'm not a hardcore partisan. I choose people over party. But that having been said, you know, the Republicans are absolutely wrong, and they're going to end up denying you. Because anytime you have minoritarian rule in a country, that excludes just about everybody. If you're driving to work, that excludes you. Because the 1% are not driving to work this morning. They don't have to do that. Attorney C.K. Hoffler, what do you think about this? I mean, what do you do, practically speaking, if you find yourself, if you encounter one of these poll workers in your precinct? I mean, what do you do?
Well, first of all, I'm going to speak based on practical experience. I've been a election protection lawyer in Florida post the 2000 travesty. And I've also been an election lawyer in Georgia. And I've been a voter in both places and observed and had horrific experiences of voter suppression. So I'm not speaking theoretically, I'm not speaking academically, I'm speaking in practice what I've seen, what I've lived, what I've experienced, and I am African American. So let me just go with Florida. In Florida, what we had when I was a election protection lawyer in Martin County, which is a Republican county, north of Palm Beach, north of West Palm Beach. Palm Beach was West Palm Beach, Riviera Beach, have very, very large Democratic African American communities that vote. And there were ballots literally in the street, on the highway, thrown out, literally not counted. So when the caller, I think Tim, said everybody has the right to vote, it's not a problem, people may technically be able to present themselves to vote, and this is what happens. When in stronghold places where Republicans control, you can give a lot of people, if their signatures don't match up perfectly with their driver's license, then, and if they are Democrats, this is what I observed, they would be given a provisional ballot. And so they could vote with the provisional ballot. Well, we know that that's a trick. That is the voter suppression trick. But Republicans would present whose signatures did not match up, and they would be allowed to vote. That's voter suppression, because those provisional ballots would then go before a committee, and I was a lawyer observing the actions of that committee and ensuring that the committees applied the rules equally, because this is how it went down. There was a 3-person committee, all of them Republicans, and they would look at the ballots, look at the signatures, and make a determination as to whether that provisional ballot would count. And 9 times out of 10, if I hadn't been there and a team of lawyers hadn't been there, they would have had the ballots of Democrats and Black and brown people not count, but for our intervention. That's voter suppression. That's what I observed. That's what I lived. That's what I saw. That's what I experienced. Then in Georgia, during the last presidential election, in Brookhaven, which is an area that has a lot of Democrats as well, Brookhaven used to be part of Buckhead. So you do have a lot of Republicans, but there's a strong Democratic presence, and there's a strong Latino or immigrant community as well, because it's the beginning of Buford Highway, which goes further north, and they're just strong Black and brown voters. In my precinct, there were brand new machines, but the poll workers hadn't been trained on the machines, didn't know how to turn on the machines, and it took 6 hours for an engineer to come and turn on the machines. 6 hours. I was in line waiting.
Oh, wait a minute,
It
hold
was
on. No,
hot
that's the home. That's the Georgia's the home of Home Depot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because there are some machines that did not even have plugs.
Yep. and people and the poll workers were not trained. Now, miraculously, 5 minutes away, the same machines, brand new machines, were working, and the poll workers were trained miraculously in precincts that had very, very strong, large Republican voters. This is miraculous, incredible. If I hadn't lived this and seen this, and we escalated that up, I mean, this is well known, well documented. If I hadn't lived, seen, called the press, and all that kind of stuff, it would be different. Because I'm a trial lawyer, evidence is critical. And you have to capture the evidence when it's happening, not 5 hours later, not 10 hours later, not the next day, not to talk about, but when it's happening. And that's what we experience. So to people who say everybody has the right to vote, there's no voter suppression, they just aren't living in the real world. And they're not living in precincts that have strong Black and brown voters. There were lines around the entire campus of Morehouse College. Morehouse College, for those who don't know, a predominantly Black institution of Black men. There was voter suppression. The machines wouldn't work for hours. The students were there waiting patiently to vote because they refused to be denied the right to vote. And so, but for enlightened and people who are determined to vote because they understand historically what it means to be a Black person and to being denied to vote. They understand historically what it means to have people who were killed, whose dogs attacked because they just simply wanted the right to vote. You see, there are many people who understand that and who refuse to be denied. So they were going to wait until it was done. Around the school, there had to be exceptions made, pouring to court to fight for people to vote so the precincts wouldn't close before the machines began to work. So anyone calling in, don't tell me that there's no voter suppression. Don't tell me that everyone has the right to vote, because that is not an accurate statement when you throw into the mix what happens every single day.
Well, I'm going to give the final minute literally to, well, you know what, David, can you stay with me for a hot second, UNCK? I know we're about to talk about the Espionage Act, but I'd like you to give us a closing comment, David, at the top of the next hour, just in a few minutes, because this is very, very important. This is a precinct strategy from the Republican National Committee that is designed to intimidate you. And some of these people are going to be loud and mean, and it could become physically violent in this heightened atmosphere. You just see this young man, this 29-year-old who committed suicide, we've been told, who drove toward the Supreme Court yesterday. A lot of things are on and cracking. Even President Trump said the country is on fire. He called and asked Attorney General Merrick Garland, what can I do? Wow. Yeah. And it is in this context that there are thousands upon thousands of volunteers who have been trained to go to every precinct that is Democrat, that has a Democratic majority, to intimidate you and keep you from voting. You need to be aware of that, and you need to know exactly what to do if and when you encounter it. The chances are great that you will encounter this in the midterms 2022. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show. We're going to be talking about the Espionage Act. What is it? What is it? Why is it that mostly left-wing people have been prosecuted under it? What's going on, everybody? Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Yeah, David, we're on Facebook Live now. I want you and CK just to give some closing thoughts on that, because this is real. And, it's a funny thing. Since we had a Black man who could become president, it was likely that he was going to become president, he became president, we've taken our eyes off the ball with respect to voter suppression and how it is enacted. We don't really, it was shocking to me.
I don't know.
Well, but I'm just saying in 2008.
The other way around. I would say that the election of our first Black president reignited.
No, I think that it did, but I didn't hear enough of a conversation about it. Like to train me in how to deal with this if I encounter this. Because that was my concern in 2008 and 2012. I'm sorry? Chip Gibbons?
Sending Chip Gibbons through.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
I'm here.
Thank you. Hey, Chip. That's what I don't see enough of a.
I also think, and CJ would know this story even much better than me, but the Republican National Committee got put under a consent decree back, 1982, after they were trying to do exactly this. They were effectively, going to polls and intimidating and over-challenging, that they often call it voter caging, Black and Latino voters in New Jersey. And that consent decree, barring them from this kind of behavior, lasted, I believe, until the end of 2017. So for a long time, they weren't really able to engage in earnest officially as a political party in these kinds of efforts.
Well, they're back.
And Santita,
yes.
The only thing I would add is that it was because of the voter suppression that happened and the travesty, all the mess that happened surrounding the Gore when Gore was running, that the election protection came into being when Barbara Amline was at the Lewis Committee on Civil Rights. Mm-hmm. It was as a result of that where people were saying voter suppression is at an all-time high. And so lawyers and non-lawyers were trained in significant numbers. And by the way, this is a nonpartisan effort, election protection. It's nonpartisan. Were trained so that they could observe the elections and make sure that there were not these types of aberrations happening. And when they existed, report them up so that action could be taken in the courts if necessary. So I think that the alarms were sounded, and I think Obama benefited from that because, in fact, I became engaged as a result of voter suppression, of what I saw, because I was in a very, very, I was living in Florida, in Stuart, Florida, and as I said, a very, very strong Republican county. There's nothing wrong with that to me. I mean, you could be Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter to me, but everybody should be able to vote, and we shouldn't have these strong levels of voter suppression. I observed groups of severely impaired adults who had severe impairments being directed by and taken to actually vote when they couldn't see, they couldn't read, some couldn't hear, and where volunteers with them were voting for them. Now they couldn't see, they couldn't read, they couldn't hear, and in a way that was clearly designed to have them vote for a certain party, which we challenged. And based on the challenges they put in place, and this is just that one precinct where I happened to be there, where we happened to see these things. They had to put in place different measures. This is one example out of millions of examples. It happens all the unchecked. It will continue to happen. Now it's heightened because there are laws in place that prevent people from giving water in line, giving food in line. Someone can collapse and almost die, and you can't give assistance. Well, I can tell you what, that's not going to happen. If someone's in line and needs medical assistance, people are going to help that person because we are human beings after all. And so there are measures that are being taken place to counter all these voter suppression laws right now as we speak, but not from a partisan standpoint, from a humanitarian standpoint, so that people don't feel threatened. Because in states like Georgia, open carry states, Texas, Florida, all of those states, those people who are doing this will be armed. They will be armed. And so what will happen is law enforcement will be called because people don't feel safe voting when there's somebody who's armed with a gun in plain sight, who's making threats, who's saying things, intimidating voters at the polls. I think people don't realize there are people who sit within 100 feet because there's some requirements and violate that law, and they're yelling things at people.
That's my point.
And this happens right now. This is not happening in the 60s. This is happening right now. So with that happening, there are trained volunteers that understand what to do under those circumstances, because what we don't want is an OK Corral, a shooting gallery. Because when you're in states like Georgia, like Florida, where people are arming themselves because they're arming themselves to protect themselves and their families. And by the way, the fastest growing demographic of people getting and being trained at getting arms are Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is
60 seconds, everyone.
Stand by.
So this is a real issue. Not to mention the litigation I was involved in, where we're representing the interests through Rainbow Push, Transformative Justice Coalition, Black Voters Matter Fund, and others. Close to 200,000 voters in Georgia that we believe were illegally purged from the rolls. So this is huge and massive in many states, and it is simply a misrepresentation to say it doesn't exist.
And we need to continue. And no, we need to get. And that's why I wanted you to get this out on Facebook Live. But I'm going to give you all 5 minutes because I've got to make a hard pivot into the Espionage Act. Okay. As I hear this, sorry, Devin.
10 seconds.
How nice. Thank you. Excellent. Wonderful.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Yes, we can. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am breathing.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show, coming to you from WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I want you to call me at 773-763-9278. Tim, thank you for calling with your story about voter suppression, which you have some questions about how we vote, voting by mail. Although, thank you, Ms. McCrimmon, you just said, look, wait a minute. People have been doing this in Oregon and Washington State for years, and it's not a problem. In fact, that's really the usual mode of voting in Oregon, voting by mail. Got to talk about this, everybody. We should make it easier for people to vote, not harder for people to vote. And these big cases in which people have been charged with actively trying to change people's votes and whatnot, the GOP's led that, everybody. And remember the Brooks Brothers riots, Effie Rolfe, the Brooks Brothers riots just go back to 2000. And you saw the women in Talbots and the Lilly Pulitzer outfits and, just very preppy. And then the men in Brooks Brothers who stormed the places where the poll workers were, where the people who were counting the votes in Florida, they stormed the places and they physically threatened these workers who were trying to count the Chads, who were trying to look at the Chads. Remember that? I mean, that's how Liz Cheney's father got into power. Well, got into office. He was already in power. So we need to, you look at January 6th. Well, I look at 2000. I look at the Supreme Court in 2000. There is a direct line from what happened in 2000 to what happened in 2020. And we need to think about that too. So maybe the January 6th committee needs to look at that also, which John Conyers, God rest his soul, he tried very hard to have us look at that in 2000. He tried very hard to have us look at Ohio in 2004, but no one wanted to pay attention to him. Now, he was a senior ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee. What else could we do? Call me at 773-763-9278, and then we're going to talk about this Espionage Act. We need to know what it is and how it is applied. It is not evenly applied. It is generally applied to people on the left wing. We need to talk about that because that is what they're going to apply to Donald Trump. So I'm just trying to figure out how this is going to work. In Chicago, we're going to have a high of 74 degrees today, partly cloudy. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 78 degrees, cloudy. In Major League Baseball, the White Sox are triumphant over the Tigers, 5-3. But the Cubs fell to Cincinnati, 8-5. And the Angels were triumphant over the Twins, 4-2. Well, it was a mixed bag for us in the WNBA. The Sky, 82. The Mercury, 67. Yay. But the Sun beat the Lynx, 90-83, sending them much, 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 much love today. Everybody, a flood watch is currently in place for millions of people across the southwestern U.S. after a weekend of rain and thunderstorms drenched the region in Las Vegas, the desert, everybody. At least 2 people have died in flooding since last week in what has become the wettest monsoon season in a decade. In the desert. Wait for it. In the desert. In Texas, the National Hurricane Center is monitoring a disturbance that will bring thunderstorms and up to 6 inches of rain over the next few days, leading to potential flash flooding. Separately, a new study indicates a disastrous mega flood is coming to California in the next 4 decades. And experts say it would be unlike anything unlike anything anyone alive has ever experienced. Wow, everybody. This is insane, everybody. The search warrant indicating that the FBI is investigating Trump for the Espionage Act violation. We're going to be talking about that just in a couple of minutes with, Chip Gibbons. Oh, boy. We got to from defending rights and dissent. House Democrats now want to request a damage assessment following the recovery of the classified documents that they found in Mar-a-Lago in President Trump's custody, everybody. Violent threats, in the meantime, have soared against the FBI as President Trump posted at least one name of one of the agents who went to his home searching for these documents. We can also ask why there was a visit by the FBI to retrieve some of these documents in June. Why weren't they all retrieved then? I want to know. A second U.S. delegation, interestingly enough, has arrived in Taiwan yesterday on an unannounced 2-day visit led by Massachusetts Democratic Senator Ed Markey. The 5-member delegation is visiting Taiwan in an effort to, quote, reaffirm the United States support for Taiwan, quote, close quote, and to, open quote, encourage stability and peace. In the meantime, they're calling this a 5-alarm crisis. The United States has a shortage of 300,000 teachers and school staff. Let me say that again. The National Education Association President Becky Pringle last week warned that the U.S. teacher shortage has spiraled into what she terms a 5-alarm crisis, with nearly 300,000 teaching and support positions left unfilled, and policymakers taking desperate and, in some cases, questionable measures to staff the classrooms. I'm moving this to the side because we're going to talk about that tomorrow. We've got to do that. And of course, it's going to be an army. Tapes have revealed that the GOP plan to contest elections from coast to coast. Indeed, it's something planned by the Republican National Committee, and they're calling it an election inspector and poll challenger workshop. They say that their mission is to, quote, recruit, train, and place Republican election inspectors in every targeted polling location and absentee count board station in order to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. And those are some of the headlines on the Santita Jackson Show. As we talk about this Espionage Act, I wanted to get a closing thought from you, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, in a minute, and I'll give you a minute and a half since you said you couldn't do it in a minute, David Daly. Attorney C.K. Hoffler, the chair of the Rainbow Push Coalition and the past president of the National Bar Association, which is the largest and oldest Black bar association, the most prestigious in the world, everybody. More than 66,000 lawyers. Of course, David Daly, senior fellow from Fair Vote and New York Times author of Rat Aft, and his current book is Unrigged. You got to get it. Starting with you, CK, and of course we can catch you on Court TV today. Yay, you're back. I love it. I love it. What do you have to say about this army that's been deployed? And what time can we catch you on Court TV?
Well, Court TV from 9 to 11 this morning.
Okay.
And I was sick for a little bit, not down, but just sick for a little bit, and had to take a break from a lot of TV appearances because I want to always be at my best when I do legal commentary. And but this army deployed. Okay, I've done voting suppression litigation in Georgia. We have to take it seriously, and the way to take it seriously is by countering those efforts, like as is being done, with lawyers and non-lawyers, and training them at the polls to do election protection work. Protect the right to vote. And by the way, that's a nonpartisan effort. Everyone should be allowed to vote without voter suppression, without threat, without intimidation. And we know that that's at a record high. If these trained, people who are allegedly going to be inspecting, if they engage in voter intimidation, it's going to be dramatic and drastic, because there will be counter efforts and law enforcement will be called. It'll just be that simple. So it's not going to be a situation where they can go in and intimidate voters. And there are people who are ready, poised to counter this and protect people's right to vote. So for those voters out there, fret not. Go forward, feel confident that you should vote, but also know that there will be protection at the polls for people who care about protecting your right to vote. And that's what we need to focus on.
And
so many organizations, including Rainbow Push, Transformative Justice Coalition, Black Voters Matter Fund, and hundreds of others, Lawyers Committee, and all of that. Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, many organizations, non-governmental organizations, these are nonpartisan efforts. Will be there protecting the rights, and that's what's going to happen.
Amen.
But these are not new tactics; they're old tactics. Been there, done that. It's just heightened. And the concern is the violence that could potentially erupt. And that's why law enforcement may have to be called, just like was the position during the last presidential elections. So this is not new. It's just intensifying.
Absolutely. And do not leave the polling place. Always call 866-OUR-VOTE. 866-OUR-VOTE. Never leave the polling place. Don't ever leave. Don't leave. Don't leave. Stay right there. Stay right there. David Daly, your final thoughts? Well, at least your final thoughts today, because you know you're going to be back to talk about this.
I would echo everything CK just said. Let me take a slightly different angle on this, though, and say that when people talk about voter fraud, what you need to do is ask them, where's your proof? Where's the evidence? Because there is no evidence of voter fraud. Voter fraud in this country is as rare as being struck by lightning twice. It simply doesn't exist. In the states that have been doing vote by mail for decades, they've done studies on this. There's a handful of cases out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of ballots. It's a pebble in the ocean. But what ginning up all of this controversy about voter fraud does is it allows those who want to make it harder and harder for certain people to cast ballots to do so. And they've been very, very successful at putting multiple barriers in front of people in the most competitive states, in the places where skimming a few votes here and there adds up and makes a difference. They're simply, so voter fraud is all of these, bans on ballot harvesting and folks who are going to be watching every drop box and voter ID. These are solutions to a problem that doesn't exist that then introduces very real and new problems of voter suppression and voter intimidation. And that is why the work that election protection lawyers do is so important. And it's why all of us have to insist on actual facts and actual proof.
866-OUR-VOTE. If you are in Montana, I think that's where they're voting tomorrow. I think is it Wyoming. If you have a problem in your polling place, and typically you won't, those are red states. Yes, I did say that because they don't have those problems. They're targeting Democratic majority districts. Everybody. If you have a problem there, though, because if you're a Republican or a Democrat, I don't want you to have a problem voting. Period. I can handle a loss. What I don't do well is being cheated out of my spot. So my father said, don't be afraid to lose. Just don't get used to it. But I'm not going to cheat my way into a win. And I'm not going to accept you cheating me out of my win. How about that? David Daly, New York Times bestselling author, senior fellow from Fair Vote. You've got to continue. Stay up with him on @DaveDaly3. That's his handle, everybody. And of course, C.K. Hoffler, attorney C.K. Hoffler, and she will be on Court TV today from 8 to 10 Central Standard Time, 9 to 11 Eastern Standard Time. So glad that you are back, my girl. Of course, we have got someone for whom I have so much respect and admiration. We have got Chip Gibbons. Chip Gibbons, every time I call him, he's like, okay, if I can make it, I'm going to make it. Of course, he's the policy director for Defending Rights and Dissent. And why do we want to have this conversation today? It's because the former president, Trump, is being investigated for potentially violating the Espionage Act. Now, this is the act that they are threatening, that they want to prosecute Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Eugene Debs, who was he? He was the premier progressive activist of at the beginning of the last century. Indeed, he was a candidate for president as a socialist. Victor Berger, who was the first socialist elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, he was violated. He was prosecuted under the Espionage Act. Daniel Ellsberg said, prosecute me under the Espionage Act. Who was Daniel Ellsberg? Daniel Ellsberg was the man who brought us the Pentagon Papers, which really effectively ended the Vietnam War for us. It just seems to me, I want to know, first of all, what is the Espionage Act? And we need to take all of this very, very seriously because we're watching the fallout of this, Chip Gibbons, everywhere. Indeed, President Trump wanted to tell U.S. Attorney General Garland that people around the country were enraged by the raid of the FBI. And the message that he wanted to deliver is that the country is on fire. What can I do to reduce the heat? Wow. Well, the country is on fire. And I want to know first of all, what is the Espionage Act? And how did President Trump, who was really trying to prosecute people under the Espionage Act, who really much more difficult for whistleblowers, President Obama did, and then President Trump cranked it up another notch or two or three or four. What is the Espionage Act? And how is it that President Trump and Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Eugene Debs are on the same page? Chip Gibbons.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is a very complicated topic, and unfortunately, some of the conversations we've seen on television about it have not been very great. No one is above the law, not Donald Trump, not the President of the United States, not anyone else. And Donald Trump is certainly someone who has engaged in plain sight in a lot of conduct that is very, very clearly criminal. So someone might say, well, who cares what law he's raided under? But since the revelation last week that Donald Trump was not only raided under the Espionage Act, but raided under Section 793 of the Espionage Act, I'll explain what that is in a minute, which is the exact section that Julian Assange, Daniel Ellsberg, Chelsea Manning, a lot of those people you named were charged under. And I think first and foremost, there's just a tremendous amount of confusion about what is or isn't in the Espionage Act. A friend of mine who's a journalist, and I did an entire review last night of various inaccurate summaries of the Espionage Act we've seen in the media. And under Section 793 of the Espionage Act, which is the section dealing with gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information, it actually require what people think of as espionage. Mm-hmm. There's another section of the Espionage Act that people who were spies or alleged to be spies, like the Rosenbergs, like Robert Hansford, were convicted under, which requires you give the information to a foreign power. But Section 793 of the Espionage Act does not require that. And I know there's been a lot of speculation that maybe Trump gave nuclear secrets to the Saudis or something like that. But if that was the case, the raid would be based probably on Section 794, not Section 793. Section 793 prohibits the unauthorized disclosure of national defense information. It prohibits the unauthorized retention of national defense information, and it prohibits somebody through gross negligence causing national defense information to be removed from its lawful place. So we don't know what subsection 793 that they're going after Trump for, but it's generally hypothesized it's either the gross negligence or the retention. So this is a statute that doesn't govern spying or things like that, but govern sort of mishandling or inappropriately retaining what the statute calls national defense information. It doesn't mention classified information, and the reason for that is because the Espionage Act was passed in 1917, and that the classification system didn't exist then. The fact that the main law that we use to criminally prosecute people for doing things with classified information, we say they shouldn't, predates the classification system. is really an example of many of the problems that we face with the Espionage Act. One of the things that has been most jarring to people I know who have been prosecuted under the Espionage Act as whistleblowers, I think more people than the average person who have been indicted under the Espionage Act, has been these claims we've seen in the media that Donald Trump needs specific intent to harm the United States to be prosecuted. There is the gross negligence provision of the statute, but barring that one, the intent level, what you have to do to be convicted under, actually says specific intent or reason to believe would injure the U.S. or aid a foreign nation. And that still sounds like a very high barrier. But what we've seen with Dan Ellsberg, what we've seen with Chelsea Manning, what we've seen with Tom Drake, is that the government comes in and says, you signed a non-disclosure agreement that said if you release classified information, it would harm the U.S. You went to classification training. Therefore, you knew by virtue of having had this training that any information released that was classified, you could have the reason to believe it would harm the U.S. It's very much, they've very much done this sort of legal jujitsu to get through, or legal leapfrogs to get around the intent requirement. And of course, this is with government employees, and Donald Trump, as the president of the United States, is the ultimate government employee. So if you treated Donald Trump the way you treated Dan Ellsberg, if you treated him the way you treated Thomas Drake, there is very little in the way here the government has to do to satisfy the intent requirement. And it's probably already would be very easily satisfied in court. Obviously, I know the law that applies to Donald Trump, in reality, is not the law that apply to the rest of us. The man has spent his whole life evading accountability for actions that either you or I would have faced serious penalties for. But so that's where we're at with what Trump is facing.
Well, let's talk about this, because I want to know exactly what the Espionage Act is, because as we look at the different aspects of it, you don't even have to have classified material to be charged under the Espionage Act. And when we hear espionage, we think spies, traitors to the country, that you have actually been in collusion with another country against the United States. And we're beginning to see maybe that's not the whole story. And so we need to talk about that. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with, everybody, because we're watching protesters who support President Trump line up outside of Cincinnati, the FBI offices there, outside of the Miami FBI offices, as President Trump, former President Trump, said, the country is on fire. What can I do to reduce the heat? Because he could get burned. Oh, let's be very clear. You got to be real careful. This is where we are. What is the Espionage Act? And how is it that President Trump got swept up with Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Eugene Debs? You can't make this stuff up. Call me at 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. That's right, President Trump and socialist progressives. What? Yeah, they've all been charged with the Espionage Act. So what do you think about that? Did you think spies and Mission Impossible? I'm dating myself, which is fine because I'm glad I'm still here. Is that what you thought? Well, there's a lot more to this act than that. And there's a reason that progressives, at least up until this, have not felt good about the Espionage Act. So we're going to talk with the policy director for Defending Rights and Dissent, Chip Gibbons, on the Santita Jackson Show. Back in just a minute. Chip Gibbons.
Very strange. Yeah. Hey.
No, we're on Facebook Live.
Development.
Oh, this is crazy.
I know. It's a very strange, when they started talking on Monday night, what could the warrant be based on?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I think, Mary McCord, the ex-DOJ person, said, it could be under the Espionage Act. Always, I said, please don't let it be the Espionage Act. Please don't let it be the Espionage Act. As someone who is currently working on legislation on the Democratic side of the aisle to reform the Espionage Act, please, whatever law it is, don't let it be the Espionage Act, because, the whole conversation now is going to be about Trump. I say, why do you want to help Donald Trump? Like, I don't want to help Donald Trump. I really, but the Espionage Act, if he gets reelected, allows him to prosecute his political opponents. Mm-hmm. Or if Ron DeSantis or someone even worse gets in there, right? I mean, they have this law in the book that allows them to persecute their potential opponents. So I'm far from wanting to help Donald Trump. I just wish, my two big issues are reining in the national security powers of the FBI and reining in the extent of the Espionage Act. And Donald Trump has not been very good for either of those issues. Now we all love the FBI and the CIA.
Is this a bizarre world or what? Is that bizarre? But we tolerated dropping bombs because Obama did it. And I'm like, no. I didn't sign up for that. See, at some point, we have to get beyond partisanship and get people. We have to get beyond phenotype and get to philosophy. I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. Just because you're black doesn't mean I'm going to support you or support your actions, or because you're a woman, or because you call yourself a progressive. No. And just because former President Trump is being prosecuted under the Espionage Act doesn't mean that I support it. It's a very dangerous act. And his being charged under it does not make it safe for you and me. I mean, you can walk out of the Pentagon with toilet paper and they can charge you. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's really just disheartening because, with the Assange case, I mean, he's so heavily demonized, but because they were indicting someone who's clearly a journalist, a lot of the discourse was moving in the right direction. You were seeing nowhere near enough, but, it takes the first few people to come to conclusion to move things forward, sort of realizing that this act needs to be heavily reformed. And now we're at this level of discourse where it's like, oh, if you're against the love spying. And it's like, no, I don't love spying. I also don't think journalists should be in jail.
Yeah. I mean,
when you're investigating a former president, which I think there's ample grounds to investigate Donald Trump.
60 seconds, everyone.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. No, but continue. You've got about 30 seconds to continue.
Oh, yeah. I think that like you want the investigation to be transparent, and Espionage Act investigations are incredibly secretive. They're incredibly non-transparent. There's cases where the judge doesn't even know what the person did and is giving a sentence. I mean, it's really shocking.
Well, but what's not shocking is that indictments and arrests and prosecutions are still political. They are. And we don't get oligarchs and we don't get right wingers. We go after progressives still. I mean, I saw it with my own brother. And I see it all the time. All the time. So,
10
please
seconds.
Stand by. This is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Hey, Carolyn.
We can change the world. Change the world. We can change the world. We can change the world. Change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. We're having a fascinating conversation with Chip Gibbons. Who is he? He is the policy director for Defending Rights and Dissent. Please subscribe to their newsletter and give them your support. They defend your right to have the right to dissent. That is what they do. They've been working with Julian Assange and so many others so that journalists would not be put in jail. How about that? Call me at 773. Don, call us back at 773. 763-9278, 773-763-9278. Let's talk about this Espionage Act. There's a lot more to it. And many people say that it's a misnomer, that it's wrongly named. There's, if you notice, look, I've told you, arrests and prosecutions and indictments are inherently political. When my brother was prosecuted, was under indictment. And I don't think was he ever indicted. Well, you know what was interesting? Chip Gibbons, when we went to court with him, when he entered his plea, the promise was that he would never seek elective office again and that he would surrender his right to vote. Now, he was able to regain his right to vote. Oh, yeah. That was the promise. They didn't want any money back. They didn't want anything. Now, mind you, all the money that you raise as a congressman or as a senator, you keep for yourself after you leave office. Okay? So they didn't want any of that. They wanted him to promise to never run for office again. That's what they wanted. I'm putting it out there for you all, everybody. You need to understand that all this stuff is political. You need to understand that. So in the meantime, and this does not make me an apologist for President Trump, former President Trump, not at all. No. But, don't let the investigation stop there. Hello? Please don't. Investigate. We need to know what happened here. We need to know. And Terry McCrimmon makes a great point that the Trump home wasn't a raid. No doors were kicked in. Thank you. Like they did to Breonna Taylor. No, he was given a search warrant, so he knew they were coming. It was a legal search, not a raid. Amen to that. Thank you. That having been said, there was also a visit by the FBI in June. Why didn't they get the papers then? They were actually taken to a place where they stored these documents. At least one place. I don't know how they function at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, Chip Gibbons, I have more questions than answers. And I don't care who gets caught in the crosshairs of this legal system. I want to have more answers than questions. And I want to make sure that it's fair. Because, see, unlike you, I lived through Fred Hampton. I was a very little girl, but he's someone I'd met. So to wake up one morning when I'm on my way to school in kindergarten or first grade and you find out that this someone who you'd seen had been killed, it was unsettling. But what I did do was watch the news. And the first iteration of the raid on Mark Clark in Fred Hampton's apartment, it was Fred Hampton's apartment. Mark Clark was sitting up doing, he was doing security that night. They said that Mark Clark had engaged in this shootout, and then Fred Hampton came up behind him, and they engaged in the shootout with the police. It turns out it was a lie. Attorney G. Flint Taylor, who is still their lawyer to this day, they went into the apartment and saw that all of the bullets were aimed toward the apartment. They didn't shoot anybody. As a matter of fact, with all of the shots that Fred Hampton got, it was the police who dragged him out of bed. And when they saw that he was still alive, they shot him in the hallway. So you want to know why I ask questions? Hey, that's why I ask questions. Because the FBI files on every member of my family. I want to know. And I think we all need to know. Chip Gibbons, talk to me.
Well, I think the point about the raid is an excellent point. I've interviewed a number of people who were indicted under the Espionage Act. At Defending Rights in Dissent, we did an entire series called Primary Sources, where what we did was we interviewed people like Thomas Drake, the NSA whistleblower, like Dan Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower, like John Kiriakou, who revealed the U.S. was engaged in waterboarding and that it was torture, and is to this day the only person to go to jail in relationship to the CIA torture program, like Jeffrey Sterling, who was a CIA whistleblower who had sued them for racial discrimination. And, the way in which they've all been very outspoken online in the last couple of days that they had their homes raided, and it was nothing like what Donald Trump did. Thomas Drake mentions that armed agents went in his house, and the FBI sent a press conference person, a press agent, to give a press conference on the front of his driveway of his house while they were raiding his house, saying all sorts of derogatory things about him. And when I talk to people, because I did all these interviews or oral histories or whatever you want to call it with Espionage Act defendants, I mean, they've been very outspoken, and I don't know why more people aren't listening to them, about this sort of disparate treatment between the way in which their homes were raided and the way in which Donald Trump's home was raided, right? I mean, there's one NSA whistleblower. He was never charged, But after the New York Times released the stories about illegal surveillance, they raid his house, and he has only one leg. He has a prosthetic leg, and he was in the shower without his prosthetic limb. And they pull him out the shower with only one leg and point machine guns at him. And I'm not saying I want anyone to do that to Donald Trump. I don't want anyone to do that to anyone. But you're a government employee, nonviolent person, no history of violence, and you're accused of giving information to the New York Times. They come into your house with machine guns and act like you're the Unabomber or Timothy McVeigh or something. So there's incredibly disparate treatment, and I really do appreciate that comment about the raid, because the people I know who are nothing like Donald Trump, they were conscientious and patriotic public employees who saw wrongdoing and thought that people had the right to know, have been particularly vocal, particularly grieved by the incredible disparate nature of these raids. And I really think that's an incredible point to hone in on. And we talk about the history of the Espionage Act, and how has Donald Trump gotten himself in this category with Chelsea Manning and Eugene Debs?
And Victor Berger with the socialist now.
Victor Berger, I know. I just can't do this. I don't know what's going on. But one of the things that I said on Facebook Live that I think bears repeating is that there's ample reason to investigate Donald Trump for criminal activity, maybe even criminal activity about retaining classified information. Mm-hmm. But when you investigate someone in this high profile of a case, where there are implications for democracy, where there are people who want to know it's being done by the book, and there's people who are criticizing it, and also just to make sure that we are treating the president the same way they would treat you or me, you need transparency. And the thing about Espionage Act investigations and prosecutions is they are inherently untransparent. There was a case of a whistleblower in 2010 who was charged, sentenced, and sent to prison under the Espionage Act. The trial judge who sentenced him said he did not know what he leaked. He did not know who he gave it to. The court was completely in the dark, but he was sure it was a serious offense. Right? Imagine a trial judge giving you a sentence, but he doesn't know what you did or what the impact of it was, but he knows it's very serious. And this is sort of the pageantry of the Act, right? Because they have to tell you the information is so secret it can't ever be released. So they're sitting in front of the jury talking in code words. During the Thomas Drake case, had it gone to trial, they would have had to speak in coded language in front of the jury. There was a whole list of words you couldn't say in front of the jury because they were classified. One of them were fiber optics, as in fiber optic cables, because you'd be shocked to know that at a time when Verizon was advertising getting fiber optic internet in your house, the NSA was using fiber optic cables. I was present at Daniel Hale's sentencing, the drone whistleblower, and the judge mentioned that he gave information to Jeremy Scahill throughout the entire indictment. It's just Reporter 1, Book 2, Publication, whatever. But they list all the dates of things are published. They list all the dates of the reporter's public appearances. So everyone knows it's Jeremy Scahill. There's no secret here. And then the judge mentioned that it involved information about drone programs in the Horn of Africa. And the prosecutor jumped up and down and says, "No, judge, no, that's classified. You can't say that." And I'm currently involved in a lawsuit against the TOD, NSA, FBI, and DOJ to get documents about the investigation that led to Daniel Hale's prosecution. And I've discovered that they've completely redacted that part out of the transcript, that the government came in and classified a judge's comment. He made an open court acknowledging something that every single person sitting in that room knew, because the government continues on with this fiction that they can't tell you who Daniel Hale gave information to, even though if you read their indictment, you read the date of each article published, you read what date the reporter was speaking and where he was speaking at, and you read what book he published, you know it's Jeremy Scahill, you know it's The Intercept, you know it's The Assassination Complex. There is no other book that meets those requirements. But they won't say, oh, they can't confirm or acknowledge that it was Jeremy Scahill, or if the information was about drones, because then they'd be confirming the existence of the U.S. drone program. So they can't release any documents about the leak investigation here, because then they'd be acknowledging the leak investigation took place. But we know the leak investigation took place because you filed an indictment in open court. I mean, and we're talking about potentially prosecuting a former president, which I have no problem with. You know, I thought George W. Bush and Dick Cheney should have been prosecuted for torture and war crimes. I am not one of these people who think it's terrible.
But of course, wait a minute.
They were not treat a powerful person like everyone else.
They were establishmentarians, so they're not going to get charged with anything. You're not going to even discuss the Brooks Brothers riots, right? I mean,
no, I know.
I mean, it's just, I'm just saying, if you're going to play the game, play it by one set of rules and let me know what the rules are. Because prosecution does not depend upon the classification of the documents. They don't even need to be classified documents for you to be charged under this act, Chip Gibbons. There's something about that just, I mean, and wasn't there a black activist who had his home raided just a few weeks ago?
There was members of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, which is an organization that has existed for 50 years. He had his home raided by the FBI in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I believe Kansas City, Missouri. There were some other raids, St. Louis, Missouri. They raided their radio station. They are a Pan-Africanist socialist movement. I believe that's the best description of them. And they're not even charged with a crime. There was an indictment of a Russian individual living in Russia, operating in Russia, running a Russian group that the government alleges conspired to defraud the U.S. by getting U.S. persons to act as unregistered foreign agents of the Russian state. And it's sort of a silly indictment, not because I think foreign interference is good. I don't think any country should be interfering in the foreign affairs of others. But because, like, this is an indictment that is never going to go to trial, right? We know Russia is not going to extradite one of their own citizens living in their own country for working with their own government. I mean, it'd be like if Vladimir Putin said, hey, send me some of these spies from Langley. I think they've been spying on us. I said, oh, okay. We'll just send over the whole CIA Russia unit. It's such a joke. But in the indictment, the types of actions they're doing, which we were told by the Assistant U.S. Attorney General for National Security, Matt Olson, are the worst, most blatant acts of Russian interference in our country ever, is they allegedly helped an organization put a petition on change.com or change.org accusing the U.S. of genocide, mirroring the famously charged genocide petition from the 1950s of Paul Robeson and William Patterson and W.E. Du Bois, which was also, interestingly enough, accused of being foreign influence, of organizing a speaking tour about reparations. There was two other groups in there. One was a California secessionist group, and the other group was, I'm not even sure how to describe them, but you know, and they printed out posters for them to protest Facebook with. And, you know, I mean, it's such low-level actions, and it's such groups that you don't have a big voice in this country. I mean, whether you agree with them or not, they're not groups with a huge voice in this country. And they're sitting here saying the Russians are sowing misinformation, they're sowing disinformation, they're sowing divisions. And like, what are you doing? And it's like, well, here's this group that have for 50 years been advocating for reparations for slavery. Are we saying reparations for slavery is disinformation now?
Yes.
Is that Russian disinformation?
Yes.
I mean, because I think if you're saying that, you need to come out and say it, because a lot of people are going to say, wait, what?
No. And then a lot of people will say that is Russian disinformation. You're trying to destabilize America. I mean, look, anytime you chased Paul Robeson out of the United States to Russia, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, only the socialists, the left-wingers, are the ones who've been prosecuted, who've had to serve time under this. not the oligarchs who drop the bombs, who steal all the money, who control Wall Street. None of that. Let me bring up Robert. Robert from Dixon. How you doing, Robert? What's on your mind?
Well, I was just listening to your show, and by the way, you have an excellent show, Miss Jackson, and I enjoyed listening to it every morning.
Thank you, Mr. Robert.
You're very welcome. You're talking about all these people that are bringing important information to the American public, yet here for the last 5 years, 6 years, we've been talking about Trump and the Russians, and I don't hear anything about Miss Reality Lee Winter, the one person that brought actual proof that Trump was lying about the Russian interference. Why is that?
What do you think?
Well, that's a really good point. Reality Winter is another person who was prosecuted under the Espionage Act. The document that she was put in jail for giving to The Intercept was later released by Mueller during the Mueller report. So she's literally serving time in prison, in federal prison, in really horrible conditions. I believe she had some pre-existing mental health problems, and she contracted COVID in prison. And prison is not a good place to avoid COVID or a good place to get better mentally. It just isn't. And so she's serving time in prison while Robert Mueller is publishing the document. And, there are election boards around the country who say that they were never briefed on the information in her document, but when they saw it in The Intercept, they took security measures to secure our election. So Reality Winter is absolutely somebody who we should be speaking about. 60 Minutes is a segment about her. It's 60 minutes, so it isn't as in-depth as a conversation as I would like, but I think it really raised a lot of problems about the Espionage Act. And I do thank 60 Minutes for doing this segment that talked about the problems a whistleblower indicted under the Espionage Act faces. I fear we're not going to be seeing a lot more segments like that now that the Espionage Act is going to be all Trump all the time, as is every topic right now. But I really appreciate you bringing up Reality Winter. Defending Rights and Dissent was one of the first organizations to call for her charges to be dropped. Before she was even convicted, we gathered petitions and delivered them at the Department of Justice on National Whistleblower Day, and we've been part of the campaign for a pardon for Reality Winter. And Reality Winter recently applied for a pardon, and she was rejected. So...
Did that help you, Robert? Oh,
yes, and thank you for expanding on that. The lady that was just speaking is doing a great thing, helping people that don't really have much help at all.
Bless your heart. You're so sweet. You're so sweet. And I hope this is not the last time I will hear from you, Robert. Continue to call in, my thank you, darling. But because really, this is about giving you information. Information is empowering everybody, and you need information. I am not going to sit here. I do not get up and put all this work into this show so that I can shape your thoughts. What I want to do is give you information and present people like Chip Gibbons, who's absolutely brilliant, who does this all day, every day, defending your rights and dissent. You have a right to dissent, but we have a lot of laws. That really stop us from dissenting. Look, Dr. King, Chip Gibbons, lived under surveillance and the flirting of an indictment by the IRS. He was under audit for all of his public life and was brought into the FBI to see the head of the FBI so that he could be blackmailed out of the movement, presented with papers and evidence of his personal life. And it was the head of the FBI who was hanging out with gangsters, okay? While he was leading a life to which most Americans at that time would have objected, because he was homosexual, he was a cross-dresser, all of that. But he had the power and the nerve to try and blackmail Dr. King out of the movement. That's why when I see his opening remarks when he accepted his Nobel Prize in 1964, leaned into that lectern and said, "I accept this on behalf of Negro people," I knew exactly where he was coming from. Because the way we treat dissenters, when they become our heroes. It's just shameful. It's shameful that many, if not most, of the statues on Capitol Hill, Chip Gibbons, are of Confederates. I mean, are you serious?
Apparently, there's a double standard for treason. I mean, we always talk about, the Espionage Act. If we give information out in public, that's somehow treason. But with the Confederate people, we're talking about actual treason.
Yeah.
And they get statues of them, and then whistleblowers go to jail, getting branded as traitors. It's really a remarkable two-tiered system of justice we have in this country.
I mean, so what is the where does President Trump fit in all of this? I mean, because as someone who's progressive, you would be attacked, and you have been attacked. I've been attacked. You've been called a Trump apologist. I'm like, no, I just want things to be fair. Period. That's it. That's all. That's all I want.
I mean, that's a really big question. We know they raided his house. We know they recovered the documents. I don't know if they are preparing a criminal indictment or not. My friend Kevin Gostola, who's from your part of the world, Chicago, and who is one of the best journalists covering the Espionage Act, he's been covering individual cases for a decade now. He was one of the journalists who went and sat during the Chelsea Manning court-martial. Mm-hmm. He's attended every single Assange hearing. He did Reality Winner. He's covered all these things.
I had him on this show. Yeah.
He is very insistent that there's not going to be an indictment of Trump because of the record of people like David Petraeus and others who, when they do this type of behavior, they don't get Espionage Act indictments because there's such a two-tiered system. Now, I have another friend who is the leading historian of the Espionage Act, and he feels very differently on this matter. But I kind of am in agreement with my friend Kevin that an indictment here is very unlikely. People do raids or searches like this all the time and don't ever produce criminal charges. I think it's possible they just want to recover the documents, but it's also not impossible. And if Donald Trump is on trial, I don't know where they put him on trial, in Florida, I guess. Under 790, that's going to be a real big problem for people like you and me who have been talking about the legitimate concerns with the Espionage Act. And all of our legitimate concerns are going to be swept aside to talk about Donald Trump, who's a grifter and a criminal. And I have no sympathy for him.
I mean,
he's not my friend.
Do you know, the thing is, stay with me for a couple of minutes on my YouTube channel, on the Santita Jackson Show channel.
Sure.
Everybody stay with me for a minute. Stay with me, and let's go over to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and Santita Jackson and Friends. I'm going to also be on Reverend Jesse Jackson's page. Let's talk about this, because I think that, we have to get beyond the person and get to the principle. I'm not an apologist for anyone, but I have noticed a pattern here. Folks who fight for the people. Eugene Debs was a union organizer. He was fighting for people regardless of their backgrounds. They get prosecuted. They get sent to jail. We keep talking about January 6th, and we should talk about it. But you haven't talked about the Brooks Brothers riots. Everybody's forgotten about them. Some of us don't even remember that they occurred in 2000. That's how we got George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. That's why it's like the ultimate irony for me to see Liz Cheney right now. I'm like, bless her heart. She could be launching a presidential run. But that's how her father and his friend got into power. It was a riot. Yeah, just like the one, but it was just polished up, because when people wear nice clothes, we don't object to them as much. But when they're working class, well, then they are criminals. Shame, 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 shame. Think about it, everybody. What I'm trying to do is bring you information so that you can think for yourself, because you can. Because you are a citizen of the Republic. You are not a subject in a monarchy. That doesn't make you less than, but we are different than. Think about that. Stay right here on the Santita Jackson Show. Let's talk with Chip Gibbons about this Espionage Act, what it really is, and who really gets targeted here, and why. Can't wait to be with you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. God bless you. Thank you, Devin, for a great show. God bless. Chip Gibbons, what are we looking at here?
I mean, it's so difficult to know. I mean, we really don't even know what these documents are, and as I said, these cases have gone to trial, conviction, sentence, without anyone ever knowing what the documents are. I know there's some sources in the Washington Post that to do with nuclear weapons, which if that's true, that's very, very serious. I know some people have speculated he was trying to share nuclear technology with the Saudis. That's pure speculation. There's no evidence. But it's possible. And if he did that, I have zero sympathy for anybody who makes the world less safe due to nuclear weapons. And I have zero sympathy for anybody who supports the brutal, repressive regime of Saudi Arabia, right? I mean, that is a country government that's committing horrible war crimes in Yemen. They've committed horrible crimes all over the world, and we've let them get away with it.
And we've done it.
That's the case.
Chip, we've done it.
Yes,
the International Criminal Court is not our friend. We don't support them. And it is the height of hypocrisy for us to try and take people to the International Criminal Court when we don't even respect them. When we commit war crimes. I mean, what? It's just stop it already. Stop.
But then we're sort of left with the question of how serious were the documents. And, the way the Espionage Act usually works, I would say there was a fairly decent, and the way overclassification works, I would say there's potentially would be, with anyone but Donald Trump, a fairly decent stance that there's nothing here, right? I mean, you hear all these people saying they wouldn't raid someone's house under this law. Thomas Drake, a friend of mine, a pre-Snowden NSA whistleblower, the whistleblower who inspired Snowden, I mean, they raid his house. They find unclassified documents, and they try to retroactively classify them and then put them on trial for retaining classified documents. That's the type of things that they do. But then at the other hand, Donald Trump has been treated with such kid gloves. Merrick Garland does seem very, very hesitant to take any action against him, even though I think the January 6th Commission has come with a lot of really bad evidence against Donald Trump that they could, put him away has been so hesitant. It doesn't seem like he would approve this raid unless there was a there, which makes it very different than most other Espionage Act proceedings. So, but at the end of the day, because it's the Espionage Act, because it's national security, and because it's classification, we're left completely in the dark. And, you're going to have people saying, "Oh, it could be nothing. It could be nothing." And Trump supporters, I don't agree with them, but some of the things they're saying about how classification works, some of the things they're saying about how the espionage works, they're not wrong. What they're not acknowledging is that Donald Trump has been treated with a double standard in his favor. And if that double standard is persisting, then we should probably suspect that this is something major, something very important. But we don't have the evidence to turn around and say that, because the government isn't making this a transparent process in the way they should be. And it isn't unique to this case. It isn't unique to Trump. They're not doing this because they're biased against Trump or out to get him. I mean, maybe they are, but this is how this type of prosecution works. I mean, we had someone in court going to jail, and the judge says, the court is in the dark. I don't know what you gave to someone. I don't know to who you gave it to, and I don't know what the impact of it was, but I'm told it's very serious. You have the prosecutor at the Daniel Hale trial, right in the face, jumping up and down. Judge, you're giving out classified information, and the judge lets the government go and redact the transcript of the public hearing. I was sitting in that courtroom. I know what was said. I'm not going to not tell people that the judge mentioned Jeremy Scahill by name and that he mentioned U.S. intelligence operations in the Horn of Africa, right? I mean, everyone was there. It was reported on in the media. It's such a farce. But part of the pageantry of the Espionage Act is that this information is so secret, we can't even say what it is. And maybe in this case it is, but I think for the sake of Merrick Garland, if I was Merrick, I would want this to be a transparent and open process. And as an American citizen, I want to know, what did Donald Trump actually do? Not because I think he's being mistreated or they're being mean to him. I don't really buy that, because I want to know how serious it was. Right? It goes both ways. It goes both ways with his supporters who think he's being persecuted. It goes both ways with people who think they're doing the right thing, but want to know how serious it is, and no one is getting that information right now.
What
and
about
that's
this?
not good for our democracy.
Well, it's not. And what about this? I don't care who it is. I want you to be treated fairly, even when you've treated me unfairly. I want you to be treated fairly, because on principle, that is where I think we need to be. And I think that Breonna Taylor should have been treated fairly. If she'd been treated fairly, chances are she'd still be alive today. If Trayvon Martin had been treated fairly. At the same time, and I can say that about Michael Bell, a white boy, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white boy up in Wisconsin, who had his brain in front of his mama and sister. The police officer misfired initially. Do you hear me? Chip, the police officer misfired. They got into a fight. He had been out having a little bit of fun, and he had pulled up in front of his mother's house and said, hey, wait a minute, I know my rights. And the police officer was like, hey, just was trying to, I guess, restrain him, apprehend him. Maybe he was driving a little erratically. I don't know, but it shouldn't have gone to prison for it. They get into a fight in front on his mother's front lawn. The mother and sister run out, and they're like, well, what's going on? The police officer pulls the gun and puts it to his head, and apparently it was too close, so it misfired. While his mother and sister are watching, he withdraws the gun by another inch or so and then blows his brains out in front of his mother and sister.
There's so many horrible cases like that. When I was in high school, there was in the neighboring community, there was a young man, a teenage boy, a high school student who had, I believe he was bipolar, and he was having an episode, and he had like sewing scissors, like shears from sewing scissors, and his parents called the police, and the police came over and shot him. He had scissors, they had guns, and they shot him. Right? There's no other way to deal with a teenage boy with mental illness with scissors other than shooting him. Apparently, I mean,
come
on, real.
And then politically, the thing is, I don't care if you're on the right or the left. I don't want you to be mistreated. I want you to be treated fairly. We kept hearing about the sensationalized pieces of the Alex Jones case. What's dangerous about that case is that what we're doing is we're trying to shut down dissenters. That for me is a problem. Even if I think that your ideas don't make a lot of sense to me, I don't think there's a lot of evidence to back it up, all of that, I want you to be treated fairly. Believe me, if you keep on living, everybody, you will have your turn. And just know that every indictment, every arrest, every investigation, it is political in nature. I mean, that is what we're seeing. Because when I look at the Espionage Act and the people who've been put on the rack for it, beyond the Rosenbergs and spying and all of that, they've been political dissenters who went against the prevailing social order of their time.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I'm in full agreement with you. You're not going to get any disagreement from me on that.
And that for me is a problem. It's a problem. It's a problem. President Trump, one of the things that we continue to do is we continue to give him all of the credit, if you will, for every problem we've ever had. And we need to stop that. Racism did not begin with him. Classism did not begin with him. All of our ills did not begin with him. He is symptomatic of some problems that we have. But globalism is a problem. Because the thing is, globalism favored corporatism and not populism. That's a problem. And that was ushered in. A Republican could not usher in globalism. You had to have a Democrat do it. You have to have Democrats drop bombs.
With NAFTA.
I mean, come on, NAFTA. I mean, all of that. That's what. So I'm like, let's just stop this. Stop playing this game. I don't know what these 86 to 87,000 new IRS agents are going to be deployed to do, but I promise you, I don't think 10 of them are going to be situated at Boeing. When Fox News was in Reverend Jackson's behind in the 90s and the early aughts, the IRS was parked in our office at 930 East 50th Street.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, that's the IRS has certainly been used to
be the police.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, on the one hand, there's a lot of wealthy people who are getting away without paying their fair share, and I would like to see someone make them do it. On the other hand, they do use the IRS agents to go after, poor people, working people, and people they don't like.
Well, what's the deal with Daniel Ellsberg? He says he wants the U.S. to prosecute him under the Espionage Act. Why?
That was from a few years ago.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I don't even remember how long it was ago. But he had additional classified information that he took at the same time as the Pentagon Papers about the U.S. sort of nuclear doomsday machine. And I believe it was 2017. He wrote a book. I think 18 different publishers rejected it, but it finally got published, called Confessions of a Doomsday Planner, which revealed his role in sort of planning this sort of nuclear contingency apocalypse. It contained information about a potential U.S. response to Chinese military actions on Taiwan, where they were willing basically to have nuclear Armageddon. And that information had never been released. It was still technically classified. And he said that he wanted them to prosecute him for releasing it because he could challenge the constitutionality of the act. He's, of course, an older man. He's in his 90s, 90-some years young, as they say. So he was in a point in his life where he was, willing to do that. And there was no indictment. They did not go after him for it. Even the DOJ knows getting 93-year-old Dan Ellsberg for exposing the fact that our government almost brought us into a nuclear war in the 1950s over Taiwan is not something that's they had enough sense not to do that. But he's a very brave man. He's one of the bravest, most courageous people I've ever met.
And at the height of his
such an interesting life.
Absolutely. He and his family came to push when he was at the height of his most controversial moment. Because I guess this is where he could find refuge and find a friendly audience. I just want the game played by one set of rules, and I want the rules to be fair. I want them to be fair, and I just don't see them being fair. And so, that's just where I am, Chip. I mean, none of this is fair.
That's where I am too. Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What should we be looking at?
I mean, I think we should just be asking that the media, at this point accurately reports what the Espionage Act is and what it means. Commenting on CNN and MSNBC and other segments last night. Making me watch cable news, that is intentional infliction of emotional distress if there ever was it.
Oh my gosh.
They just come on and they say, well, if they got this warrant, that means there's proof Donald Trump gave evidence to a foreign agent, probably a witness or video evidence. It's like, no, it doesn't. First and foremost, the standard for getting a warrant is quite low. I mean, you know this, right? It doesn't take a whole lot of proof to get a warrant. And second of all, there's nothing in Section 793 of the Espionage Act that requires the information went to a foreign agent. That's a different part of the Espionage Act that he's not being investigated under. So getting up there and saying when you have 300,000 followers on Twitter and you are a commentator on CNN and MSNBC and people think you're a legal authority, that if they got the warrants, that there's probably video evidence of him giving information to a foreign agent. I mean, that's completely ridiculous. And I don't just care about the fact that they're saying ridiculous things about Donald Trump. But I mean, that impacts everyone who's charged under the Espionage Act. When people then hear Dan Ellsberg was charged under it, they're going to think, well, that MSNBC man told me, it means they must have videotaped them giving things to the Russians. And that's not good. I mean, as somebody who has worked very hard on issues around the FBI abusing its national security powers and the abuse of the Espionage Act against whistleblowers and journalists. I mean, the last 4 or 5 years of Donald Trump at war with the FBI has not been helpful for the work I've done with the FBI, because the whole conversation becomes about Trump. And you have, on the one hand, people who Donald Trump can do anything and they think he should get away with it. And then you have, on the other hand, people who are like, the FBI are the heroes and can do nothing wrong. And it's really, really, really put a wrinkle in this really important FBI work we were doing. And, you know, part of the reason, since that was going so poorly, I've been doing a lot of work around the Espionage Act, which not many other people are doing. And now this is going to have that same Trump dynamic to it. And it's just, I mean, we're nowhere near where we needed to be in Congress, but we had 4 different Democrats and 1 Republican who were interested in putting forward various reform proposals about the Espionage Act. And I wonder if they regret doing that now, because it's not a partisan comment, but, you know, Rand Paul, he tweeted out that he wants to repeal the Espionage Act. He shared an article from 2019, mentioned its use during World War I, and his opponent, who I'm sure I probably agree with more things on than Rand Paul, tweeted back, Rand Paul wants to repeal the Espionage Act. If I'm elected to the Senate, you won't have to trust my loyalty, right? Like, you have to trust the loyalty. And you know, Rand Paul is clearly being cynical here. He's clearly bringing up the World War I stuff in order to politically help Trump. I have no respect for that. I have no respect for dragging in these good people who have been persecuted under the law to muddy the waters around a bad man. That does not make me, I'm not supporting what Rand Paul did, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with what he said. There's nothing wrong with the article. It's factually true. And then to come back with, well, you don't have to trust my loyalty. I'll support the Espionage. That is going to be the bar for progressive politics.
Reflexive.
To uphold the Espionage Act.
Everything is reflexive.
We're in trouble if
it's reactive.
Our choices are we are in so much trouble as a democracy if our choices are Donald Trump can do no wrong or the Espionage Act is great.
Or, you know, or vote blue no matter who. I mean, whoa. What are y'all talking about? Wait. And you mean to tell me I can't look at Rand Paul and say, you know, you got a point. I agree with that. Will I vote for you in November? No. But do I agree with you? Do I support you on this? Yes. And I'm going to support you as you seek to repeal this. Yeah, I support that. And see, that's where my politics become much more nuanced. And I think our politics need to become much more nuanced. A broken clock can be right twice a day. Okay? In fact, it is right twice a day. I don't have a problem with agreeing with you as I disagree with your overall worldview. I just, you know, but my life has led me down that path. I mean, the first album I did with Orrin Hatch. God rest his soul. I love that man. Did I agree with his politics? Absolutely not. Was he absolutely to the far right? Absolutely. Was he a kind, decent man? Absolutely. Did I agree with his worldview? No. But did I think that he was a decent guy? Yes. Next. And did I hear him out on? There were some points of agreement that he and I did have. That's right. But the fact that you had to give me all that run up about, no, I would, of course, I think Charles Booker is right on 99% of that. That's where we are. We couldn't even disagree with President Obama about some things. You know, I mean, or even President Biden or Vice President Harris. You know, well, no, you can't say anything. What is this? What is this censorship? Talk to me about. That's crazy. It's crazy.
That's why I'm so grateful we have programs like yours. I mean, it is a dismal media landscape, but there's a lot of bright spots on it. I mean, I do your program. I'm going to be on a community radio station in Kansas City, Missouri at 10 o'clock. I mean, there are good outlets out there still. Yours is one